Why it's time to get excited about the Houston Rockets. Over the past couple seasons, the Rockets have clearly been in the rebuild process. And although they have brought in a lot of nice talented players, they haven't necessarily been able to put everything together. But when you look at what the Rockets were able to acquire over this offseason and how they're playing so far during the preseason, I do actually think it's time to get a little bit excited about this Rockets roster. But quickly, before we get the video started, for those of you who may not know, I'm Juicy Sports. I make opinionated NBA content, and if you guys enjoy videos similar to this, hit that subscribe button, that like button, and that post notification bell. I also want to quickly mention that I recently started up an MMA channel, and if you guys are interested in that, the link will be in the description. But anyways, let's get into it. Ever since moving on from James Harden, the Houston Rockets have kind of been a disaster. As although it was obvious that they were going to be heading in the direction of a rebuild, and they weren't going to be the best team in the NBA, of course, regardless of the expectations and regardless of the good players they were able to bring in via the draft, when you watched what the Houston Rockets were doing out there on the court, it was pretty clear that they weren't playing NBA basketball. And what I mean by that is there was basically no flow to their offense. There was no play calls, there was no ball movement, there was no setting screens for each other. Basically, each and every offensive possession, either Jalen Green or Kevin Porter Jr. would just isolate for themselves. And both of those guys are talented scorers, so either they score or they don't on certain possessions. But either way, when you're a young team, what you really want to see from those guys is progression. And if you're running isolations each and every time down there, you're not going to be able to see progression for basically each and every player on the team. As even for Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green, although they're getting a ton of shots out there, they're not necessarily playing within the flow of the offense. So even for those players, they're not going to be able to show all that much progression either. And when you talk about a roster and an organization that's going through those kind of issues, the blame really comes down to a couple different guys. Of course, the blame comes down to both Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green because they're the best players on this team and they should know better even though they are young guys. But most importantly, the main blame has to go to their head coach at the time. Because as a head coach, the most important thing you can do is have everybody buy into what you're selling. When you look at the best teams in the NBA, they have very good coaches, and they're coaches that really have gotten their teams to buy into what they're selling and buy into what their offense is going to be. But when you look at this Houston Rockets team over the first couple of seasons they had Jalen Green, it was pretty clear that those players just weren't buying into what their head coach was selling. And if you're not able to have a young team like the Rockets were buy in, it's going to be very difficult to be a head coach in the NBA, period. But fast forwarding to this season, I do actually think the Rockets did a really nice job to address a lot of the issues that they've had, and going into this season and going into the future in general, I do think the Rockets are starting to have somewhat of a nice future. But the question at this point is, why do I feel that way? So the reason why I feel that way comes down to a bunch of different factors, but the main factor that I want to touch upon first has to be the addition of Fred VanVleet. Now, when you talk about Fred VanVleet, I think he helps out this team in a couple different ways, but the first way and the most obvious way is going to be his play on the court. When you look at his game, it's pretty clear that this guy's an extremely talented offensive player. Not only does he have a really nice capability to create for himself, whether you talk about that three-point range, that mid-range, or driving all the way to the basket, but he also has a really nice ability and a really nice understanding of how to run an NBA offense. And when you're adding a player like that to this Houston Rockets team, it's just going to help out everybody. Because not only are they going to get a ton of scoring production from Fred individually, but also he's going to do a really nice job at getting easy looks for a lot of these young guys on this Houston roster. But even besides his on-the-court production, another reason for why I think this addition is huge is due to his off-the-court benefits as well. When you're talking about Fred VanVleet, he's a guy who's already won an NBA championship and been a huge part of it. So he understands what it takes to win an NBA championship, not only on the court things, but also off the court. Like training, eating, sleeping, all those different things, he understands what it takes to win an NBA championship. So adding a veteran presence like that to an overall very young roster like the Rockets clearly are is going to be very beneficial. Because even though I mentioned in a lot of my videos, when you add that veteran presence to a younger roster, it's always very beneficial. But when that veteran you add to that young roster is going to be the best player on your team, it's even that much better. Because not only can Fred tell all these guys what to do out there, but he can also show it as well. So I definitely do think the addition of Fred is humongous for this Houston Rockets team. But the next factor that I want to touch upon for why I think it's time to get a little bit excited about this Rockets roster is due to the actual addition of Dillon Brooks. Now, although when you talk about Dillon Brooks over this previous season, he definitely didn't do himself favors. But regardless of all the distractions that he brought to the Memphis Grizzlies, I think when you look at his actual talent level, it's definitely there. He's one of those players that I like to call 3-and-D pluses. And what I mean by that is he has a really nice ability to hit the catch and shoot 3-point jump shot. He has a really nice ability to defend the opposing team's best player, but he's even a little bit more than that. He also has the capability to create for himself, as we did see in Memphis, he was able to average at least 16 points per game a bunch of different seasons. And adding a player like that to this Houston Rockets roster is actually going to be very beneficial, because not only does he have the capability to defend the opposing team's best player, but he also offensively has a really nice ability to play off ball when the ball's either in Fred VanVleet's hands or in Jalen Green's hands. But even besides that, if he's playing with a bench unit, he has a capability to create for himself at times as well. And overall, I just do really like a lot of the production that Dillon would be providing. But the next factor for why I think it's time for Houston Rockets fans to get excited is due to the signing of Ime Udoka. Now, Ime is a guy that's actually had a lot of success in the past with the Boston Celtics. He not only had a team that was very successful during the regular season, but also had a team that was somewhat successful in the playoffs. And adding a guy like that to this younger Houston Rockets team, a guy that has a really good offensive mindset as well as a really good defensive mindset, is actually going to be very beneficial. Because as I mentioned before, coaching is extremely important in the NBA, especially when you talk about a younger roster. Because a good head coach out there can not only help you on the court, but also can help you off the court, as he can really be a real leadership presence to a lot of these younger guys, as they can go to him for different issues they may be having, whether you talk about on the court or even off the court issues. So overall, I definitely am a huge fan of the signing of Ime Udoka. I think he's a very solid head coach out there, and I think he has a great chance to really change the culture in Houston. But now, the next question that some of you may be wondering is, what are my actual expectations for the Rockets this upcoming season? Well, in my opinion, it's pretty obvious that the Rockets are not going to be competing for an NBA championship or even be a highly seeded playoff team. But with that being said, I definitely would expect the Rockets to be at least competing for a playoff spot, and I definitely would like to see them make the playoffs. Because if the Rockets are able to make the playoffs, and even if they do lose in the first round, they would be gaining that experience and they would be showing progression. As even a first round playoff loss would be very beneficial to a lot of these younger guys, and they can build off that going into the season following. So at this point, my expectations for the Rockets would be to make the playoffs, probably lose in the first round, but if Houston's able to do any better than that, maybe make it past the first round, and who knows where they can go from there, I definitely would see that as a huge bonus. But I guess only time will tell what does end up happening with this Rockets team, not only this season, but also in the long-term future. But anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think it's time to get excited about this Houston Rockets team, or do you not think so? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did enjoy, check one of these two videos popping up now, and until the next time, peace out, guys.